I think I finally wrapped my mind around what SlapChop is missing: color depth. And that may not seem like a big deal, but color depth really is one of the most important factors in miniature painting. So today we're going to add color depth without sacrificing what makes SlapChop so appealing: speed. You know, I really do appreciate what SlapChop offers: a quick and easy approach to get your models painted to a respectable level for a tabletop game. And I've done my share of slap chopping, as well as trying to develop my own ways to improve on the style to yield better results. But you know what? I've failed on a really key aspect in these prior attempts, and that is preserving the speed that SlapChop gives. But then it dawned on me: what's really missing from traditional SlapChop and any form of painting with contrast paints is just color depth. So today we're going to keep the painting fast while adding color depth in the easiest way possible. And I want to start out by saying that I've never been happier to work on a speed painting video than this one. I have been knee deep in competition painting for Golden Demon over the last few months, and it's always fun to get a change of pace and let yourself enjoy a more relaxing, quick paint job. And Games Workshop was kind enough to send over this brand new slaanesh box, and as I've been trying to work my way through each faction in Warhammer that I've not painted before, this seemed like a good time to paint a slaanesh Marine. And I'm going to start this process with a very basic SlapChop approach, but there are some important tips I want to share so your models end up looking the best they possibly can in even one coat of contrast paint. I definitely prefer a firmer dry brush for my miniatures, or smudging brush as they're known in the art world. You have a lot more control with these firmer brushes and the ability to build up the color gradually with these compared to the more floppy makeup brushes that people often use. It's really important that you make sure your brush is slightly damp before adding paint to it. If the brush is completely bone dry, it'll give you a chalky texture, which is especially undesirable for this style of painting, because the contrast paint you place over this dry brush step will only accentuate any of the gritty texture that you've added to the model. Now, anytime you dry brush, you want to remove as much of that paint as possible before you touch your model. And you want to use something that's non-absorbent, like these particle board texture pads here. This way you're removing all of the excess paint without removing all of the moisture from your brush, which is exactly what will happen if you use a paper towel to remove that excess paint prior to painting your model. One thing that's kind of a pain in the butt with this painting approach, and you're really going to want to pay attention to, is that you really need to clean your models really well if you're going to use the SlapChop method to paint them. That's because any raised area, any uncleaned flash, any unsmooth area that you didn't get perfectly smooth before you started this painting is only going to be accentuated, because the dry brush is going to grab any of those ugly details and is going to accentuate them, so the audience is going to see every imperfection of your model you didn't get perfectly clean before you primed it. I'm starting from a black primer, and I'm going to dry brush my way up to a pure white, but I'm actually doing this in a few steps. It doesn't take very long for me to go from dark gray to light gray to a pure white, because this process is pretty quick and it gives us a much wider range of grayscale depth. Of course, if you're in a hurry, you could just do one pass of a light gray or an off-white, but what that's going to do is only give you really bright areas and then really dark areas in that untouched primer. By quickly working through a dark gray, a mid-tone gray, and a white, we're adding a lot more depth in this grayscale, meaning the colors we put on top of them are also going to showcase that depth. Now onto that super satisfying part of SlapChop, where we just paint our 3D coloring books with a single coat of contrast paint. Wait, hold up a second here. Why does this cloak kind of look like shit? Well, I think it's because anytime you paint a large flat surface with contrast paint, you're gonna run into problems, because it's always looking for a crack or a low area for it to settle in. But if there are none of those, it's just gonna settle in some weird places. So for now, I'm just gonna add a second layer of this color on this cloak, and hopefully we can fix that later. And this cloak is gonna be a big point of contention to keep an eye on as we come back for a second step in this approach later. If we can make certain areas like this cloak look better while adding color depth, well, that'll prove that this multi-slap is actually a superior painting process. I continue to work my way around the model, painting each different section. And while I'm doing this, I'm getting slightly frustrated about how long this is actually taking. And this has always been my frustration with SlapChop painting. It's supposed to be really fast, but if you make a mistake in placing any one of these colors on an area it's not supposed to go on, well, you can't just easily fix that mistake. So you actually have to really pay close attention and have a slow painting process to get each of these individual sections of armor and tiny details to the color you want them to without having the paint roll over into any other color. And I'll admit that this model isn't necessarily ideal for SlapChop because this Chaos Marine has so many individual panels and details. Organic shapes like monster skin, flesh, and fur all look much better when slap-chopped or basic contrast painting style compared to a model like this that has way more geometric shapes. But on the bright side, painting models like Space Marines is actually really good for teaching you how to better control your paintbrush. You'll learn that you don't want to overload your brush with too much paint, or it's just going to spread out of control everywhere and flood the surface. You'll learn that pulling your brush down into the areas where one panel or shape meets another allows more of the paint to be deposited there, creating the color depth that looks so much better. And you'll also learn that most of the time we're not actually painting with the tiny tip of our brush. The edge of our brush or our brush at an angle can give us just as much control, even in tight areas. And then to finish up our SlapChop 1.0 layer, I'm moving on to the metallics. I'm just going to base coat these. 2 coats is often enough, and then put a wash over top of them. Now this step is particularly painful for me, not because I don't think it's the right step to take or that it looks bad, but because I know what I'm going to do next, which is actually going to ruin much of these metallics, but I've got a reason for that. You see, if I was actually painting this model with this new and improved multi-slap method, I'd wait to paint the metallics until the very end of the paint job. The reason I'm doing it here is that I want a side-by-side comparison of the same model painted after each step, so we can really tell how much a difference is made between SlapChop 1.0 and multi-slap. And here is our slap-chopped Slaanesh Lord Exultant. And I think he looks great. I think he's going to look just fine on the table next to the rest of an army. But if you'll notice, he's actually missing a lot of color depth. Look at the black. Look at the pink, look at the purple, and even the accent green colors. They are ones and zeros. They're either a color or they're not a color. And that's not just because the SlapChop didn't show itself through on these colors. It's just that there's no color depth here to really bring the model into the third dimension. So let's see if a quick second layer of SlapChop will fix some of these problems. And for this, I'm just using a single color, an off-white pale sand. I'm doing this because I think this color will look better underneath the other warm tones, the purples and the pinks. And I don't think using an off-white here is going to be a major factor, but it will give us less of a stark jump than a pure white would. And all I'm doing here is a singular dry brush layer all over the model with just this one color. I'm trying to leave most of our first layer of contrast paint untouched, focusing on the upward facing surfaces. A key factor here is that I'm not just trying to catch the edges of the details. I actually want larger portions of the volumes to get caught in this second coat of dry brushing so we can build up a more natural mid-tone and highlight with a depth of color. Today's video is brought to us by Into the AM, and they are excited to share that they now make jeans. And these things aren't just any jeans. Ever since I've been wearing them, they have become an everyday essential for me. No matter what the occasion, whether it's busy days, casual evenings, or everything in between, they are what I'm wearing. And it's because they hit all the right notes. The quality is unmatched. They're built to last, and the style is timeless. And equally as important is how comfortable they are. Honestly, I feel like I'm not even wearing jeans in these things. They have the perfect amount of stretch to them, they're incredibly soft, and they are without a doubt the most comfortable jeans I've ever worn. So why don't you join me in making these your all-day, everyday jeans. And if you use my link down in the video description below, you get 10% off, not only on your new jeans, but on everything on Into the AM site. A big thank you to Into the AM for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get back to it. And I kind of hope that as you're watching this, you're feeling the twinge of pain that I am, because this feels like I'm just ruining the entire paint job that I spent an hour doing. But it's all in the name of science. Again, I'm reminded that I would have just kept all the metallic painting to the very end, shortcutting some of the extra work that this is causing me. But I am second guessing if this was a good idea at all. But that's the way of all experiments, I suppose. And I guess if this ends up looking like ass, at least you won't have to go through the process to determine that like I did. Now, when we add this next layer of contrast paint, it's important that I don't just use the same color that I used with the first coat. I want something that's a little bit brighter and a little bit lighter, and that can create some issues because some of the time these lighter colors have pretty weak coverage, and that means some of that dry brush paint that we just added is going to peek through. And I think overall that's okay if we did our job and created a faint dry brush second coat, because it's allowing some of that color depth to build through, us to see some of that lighter color, while this color just slapping over the entire surface is going to add more color depth even in those shadows. I'm noticing that certain materials on this model are really benefiting from this compared to others, especially anything really dark like his black armor. Before, it basically had no depth because I needed to get a full coverage of black on that armor so it actually read as black. But now, since we quickly worked over that existing black with a dry brush, we can add a realistic highlight to the edges and the tops of curved surfaces that add so much more depth to those shapes. This observation alone has gotten me excited about learning something from this process. I can see how just priming a marine in a certain dark color, then dry brushing, then adding the appropriate contrast paint over the top can get a really quick, nice, rich, dark marine armor color in next to no time. One important detail to keep in mind for this second round of SlapChop is that it took way less time than the first coat. See, this took me less than 10 minutes to just dry brush quickly and then slap on the new color over top of that dry brush layer. And I think that's a really important data point. SlapChop is all about getting a solid looking model in a short period of time. If we stray too far from the short period of time aspect, we've lost the whole point of this system, which I'm totally guilty of in past iterations of trying to improve on SlapChop. I've moved too far away from the get it done fast mentality, but this is really looking promising, so let's keep moving. The model on the left took me a little over an hour to do a traditional SlapChop. Now, to add the secondary layer, that model on the right took me a little bit less than 10 additional minutes. That equates to 16% additional time. So the question is, does the model on the right look at least 16% better than the one on the left? If you think so, then multi-slap may be worthy of your consideration. At this point, I just like saying multi-slap. It's an E-Honda joke. All right, we've compared SlapChop to multi-slap, but wait, there's more. Now, you may be thinking that we're simply going to repeat this process to a third, fourth, and fifth coat of multi-slap, but I think that's actually a waste of time. You see, the reason why is these models are at such a small scale. There's so little, and for us to try to dry brush those tiny details with enough precision that each successive layer of multi-slap covers less and less of that dry brushing area for us to then put an additional coat on actually feels pretty inconsequential because of the diminishing returns we're going to see based on the limitations of dry brushing and the time spent. But a thought did occur to me, and I want to continue this experiment. And some of you aren't going to like this step, but I saw an improvement on that 16% additional time that we got by multi-slapping. So let's see how an additional 16% more time, 10 more minutes, will give us with a select single coat of highlights with standard paints. Because any form of speed painting, however you want to categorize that, including SlapChop, is about return on investment for time spent. So I think if I spend 8 to 10 minutes just edge highlighting the important things, that time is the same as whatever else I want to spend it on, but this might give us a better return on final quality. I grabbed just a couple of bright colors and limited myself to 10 more minutes. I'm just hitting the most impactful edges here. I'm certainly not edge highlighting everything. I'm not touching any of the metallics, and I'm not worrying about the downward facing edges or corners. The black and pink armor panels definitely benefited from this step the most, and I actually finished this in just under 7 minutes, so I took those extra 3 minutes to punch up the edges of the blades with metallics, the rivets, and I mirrored his green glowing eyes with that energy glow stick thingy on his halaberdo. with that, we have one model painted, and then that model painted on top of that paint, and then that model painted on top of that paint, painted on top of that paint. And of course, we all understand the basic premise that the more time we spend on a model, the better it's gonna look. But I really wanted to push that under the constraints of painting fast in the SlapChop method. And I guess the biggest thing I'm taking away from this experiment is not that multi-slap should entirely replace traditional SlapChop painting. What it is a path forward once you've both slapped and chopped. You've gotten that army painted. You want to improve it a bit over time. Well, now is when you can institute step 2 of the multi-slap. This upgraded step can happen at any time. It can happen unit by unit, and it will return a noticeable upgrade for a very small investment of time. Maybe you start with your hero models and you just add that extra 16% of time on them, and they'll look better than the regular chaff of your army. But the good thing is, because they all have that basic SlapChop undercoat, they're not gonna look like they don't belong with the rest of your army. They're just gonna look a bit better for a little bit more time. Thanks for hanging out and painting with me today. I had a lot of fun painting this new Slaanesh model. These new ones look amazing. I found myself looking through the entire codex to see what other units in the army appeal to me. Painting a Chaos Marine and reminding myself that there are quick and easy ways to improve your existing painted army makes me want to go back and revisit some of my earlier painted armies like my Night Lords. I think I could definitely add a lot more pop to that army with multi-slap in a pretty limited amount of time. And finally, I really appreciate all your support of the channel. Subscribing is first and foremost so valuable, so you always know when my next video is out. Also, I've got affiliate links down below where you can get your hobby goodies at a discount, and that supports me. You can pick up a new Ninja shirt, or you can join us on the Patreon where you get access to behind the scenes videos, as well as access to our super cool Discord and other fun rewards as a thank you for joining the Ninja on Patreon. Now I'm going to be back next week with another new video. Just make sure that sometime between now and then you find time in your day to slay the gray.